Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second walkthrough. Uh, this one will focus on networking, and as we did previously, we'll go through all the challenges. For those who didn't attend the first session, what happens is we will go through all the CTFs that were under the networking challenges. Then we will solve each of them and you can get an idea of how to solve them. This was based on our Aspire CTFs, which ran from January all the way to, I believe, June. And what we're doing now is ensuring that those who are unable to solve it, those who are able to solve it, can get an idea of what the creators had in mind and also alternative ways to solve the CTFs, even for those who had already solved them. So hopefully, ideally, we would like to take an hour or so. So let me begin with the walkthroughs. I created the networking ones. So for this session, I'm going to take you through the challenges. So the very first challenge was called the wire. Let me share the challenge page. It's on ciphercode.dev if you would like to view it yourself. So I hope everyone can see my browser. So the very first one was called the wire. And what it said was, beware what you see on the network, your secrets will be revealed. And there is a file attached called Cisco. So the first thing you do is, of course, download the file. Once you download the file, the best thing to do is to open it up with Wireshark. Wireshark is a tool that enables you to view the packet details of your capture. It can also allow you to capture network traffic and also analyze it. So I had already downloaded the file. So I'm just going to open it by double clicking it. Then I'll share my screen with you. So let me share the opened Wireshark filter. So once you open it up with Wireshark, this is what you see. It's a list of packets, and then you'll have the packet details on the lower panes. So the very first thing we do is analyze what protocols were involved in the communication, because the statement of the challenge was, beware what you see on the network. So somehow something was transmitted on the network. The best way to do this is to go to statistics, then go to the protocol hierarchy. And once you go to that, you should be able to see a list of the protocols. In my case, I can see there is Telnet under the IP version 4. And Telnet is a clear text protocol. So if anything is transmitted over Telnet, it's going to be visible on a network capture. So anyone on the network would be able to see the messages or any data that was transmitted over Telnet. So after that, the next thing we do is we go to our pickup again. So let's go back to Wireshark. And what we do is we apply a filter. So to apply a filter on Wireshark, you just apply it on the bar at the top here. So in our case, there's a telnet filter. So what these filters help is do this, they help you narrow down what you can see. can see on your Wireshark window. So if I filter that out, I'll only view the telnet data. So we can see a lot of telnet data. Then one thing that is uh, that helps you to view what actually happened inside the telnet communication is right-clicking on a packet. You can right-click on one of them, then go to follow, then TCP stream. So this will help us view the data that was transmitted. So let me show you what that brings up. So this is what you should have. And as you can see, this is actually someone logging into the switch. We can see that they used a username called Aspire. They used a password called Aspire Cisco 2021, and they wrote something here. But within this, we can immediately see our flag based on what our flag format is supposed to be. And that was how to solve this challenge. So basically was to teach you about clear text protocols, why they are dangerous and why you shouldn't use them, and expect privacy. So next, we'll go to the second challenge. So let's go back to the challenges. So the second challenge was called redirection. We have another pickup file attached. And what we are told is, what is the URI path where a client was redirected from? So redirection is used in HTTP communication, web communication, where you try to access, let's say, a link, then the server uh, forwards you to another page or redirects you to another page. So again, we can use Wireshark to open up that pickup. So I'm going to open that new pickup file and share my Wireshark screen. So once we have that there, uh, the thing now we need to do now is filter out HTTP traffic. You remember in the previous challenge, we filtered out telnet traffic, but for our case now, we are interested in HTTP traffic. Again, what we will do is type HTTP in the filter bar. Then once we filter that, we'll only have HTTP traffic displayed. Again, with HTTP traffic, we can view various details about it, but what we are interested in as per the challenge was the redirection. So where someone was redirected from. So a good thing about Wireshark is it has a search feature. So you can click the search button. It's this magnifying glass icon here. Then in our case, we'll select packet list. So we'll search what we want to search in the packet list. Then we'll search for a string. And HTTP has various status codes that are used to signify what was the status of a HTTP communication. So it could be that the communication was successful. In that case, we get a status code of 200. So 200 means that the the communication succeeded. So in this case, it was 200. No, a lot of people know what 404 means. That means page not found. So there are various status codes. In our case, we are interested in the direction. And the status code for redirection is usually 302. So we can search for that, and you'll see it immediately goes to the packet that has our redirection message. So again, as before, we can right click on it and say follow. In this case, we'll follow the HTTP stream. Then it will display the actual breakdown of what happened during this communication. So if I click on this, then let me share what this opens up. We get this page here. So this breaks down that server to client communication. And we can see the redirect, but the question was from what location was it redirected from? And in our case, it would be this path here. This is the URI path. The URI is the actual path. The URI doesn't really include the host name and so on and so forth. So in our case, this would be the URI path. I also remember we were supposed to specify the flag in a certain format. In our case, we would have started with the word aspire, then enclosed this in the curly brackets as was requested from the format. You aren't restricted to Wireshark when doing this. There are other tools you can use. There's a tool called Brim. It's very useful. I think let me walk you through how you could have solved this too with Brim. So it's a tool you can install on both Linux and Windows. I am on a Linux machine, so I'll open it up and share my screen. So let me open up the application, then share it. Uh, 1 second, here it is. So once you open it up, you have such an interface. So you can drag the packet onto the interface here that says import files, and it will open up the pickup for you. Once you have the pickup open, you will notice that on the left pane, there are various pre-populated filters. You can specify the filters for yourself, but there are some that have already been done for you. In our case, we are interested in HTTP requests because we are looking for a redirection. And again, we can edit this filter here to specify that we also want to see status codes. So you don't have to cram these filters. There is the Zik page. If you Google for not the Zik, the Brim page, if you Google for it, you'll be able to see how you can use filters and modify them and so on and so forth. So this is an alternative to Wireshark. So it depends on what you're comfortable with. How this tool works is it's built on another open source tool called Zik. Zik is a network security monitoring tool that is useful for network analysis. So you can also experiment with Zik, but we'll cover that more during the network security monitoring challenges. For now, all we'll need to do is add the status code here. And once we filter that out, we'll see the one that has the 302, which was our redirection code. And once we have this, we can see from this tool, it already has specified the URI for us here. So that was another easy way to solve this. So it depends on what you are comfortable with. Some Wireshark, some Brim. So you aren't limited to one tool, really. You can use what you're comfortable with. So next we'll go to the other challenge. So switch to our challenge page. So go to the challenges page. So go to the networking challenges. We'll cover the different sections during the other weeks. So for now, it's just the networking one. There was one asking about a gateway. So let's go to this one. And the question is, what is the MAC address of the interface of the router in the network? Again, we also have been told how to specify our flag. The pickup file is the one we had opened before. So I have that open in Wireshark. So we'll go back to it. And once you go back to it, let me share it again. You'll see it's the same pickup we had opened before. Again, we are going to discuss another protocol that is used in network communication. It's called ARP. It's used by devices to identify other devices. So if a device joins a network, at that point, it doesn't know what device has what IP address. So what it does is it searches for other IPs by using ARP requests. So what it does is it will send a broadcast message to the network. A broadcast message is a message that is sent to all the IPs on that network. So it will ask who has this IP. Then a device will reply, I have this IP or I own this IP. And how devices can be identified uniquely is using their MAC address. So a MAC address is a unique identifier that is assigned to a device on the network. So an IP address has to be associated to a certain MAC address. Otherwise, there would be conflicting IPs if this wasn't done. So the first thing we can do is filter all app messages. Again, you can use the ALP filter. Once we filter that, again, as I said, you can see there's ALP traffic, and as I had explained, it operates with a device asking other devices to tell it who has a certain device. So it's a broadcast message that will be sent to all other IPs. So in this case, you see it's asking every IP who has this address. The one thing you should note about networks is when they are on a subnet, the very first IP address is going to be your IP address. So let's say a normal subnet, the most common one you'll see has hosts 255 total addresses. The very first one, .1, will most likely be the one that is associated with the router and the gateway. And the final one, which is .255, will be the one that is the network address or the broadcast address. So in our case, what we would be interested in is the .0.1. In some cases, this may be different, but for our case, it's the .0.1. And what we want to figure out is the MAC address. That was the question. What was the MAC address of the gateway? And we can see from this message here that this tells us that the 192.168.0.1 is at this address. So this would be the MAC address. So this would be our solution to the flag. Again, you have to specify it in the format that is requested. So that's the word Aspire, then curly brackets, and the MAC address in between. So let's move on to the next challenge. The next challenge is called SATS. So the challenge asks, what is the serial number of the X509 certificate observed on the network? So again, we can use both Wireshark and Brim. So for now, I'll start with Wireshark because I still have the file open in Wireshark. And again, notice we are being asked for the X509 certificate. And what we are being asked for is the serial number of this certificate. So let's switch back to Wireshark. So once we are on Wireshark, we can first apply a filter. So for certificates in HTTP communication, the filter is usually called SSL. So we can apply an SSL filter to it, and this will just narrow down our communication to communication that involves certificates, which is, in our case, the TLS communication. Then if you go through the packets, we can see there are some exchanges. There's a certificate involved here. So we could go to this message and break it down and see what details the certificate has. So there are a lot of fields in that certificate, and so on and so forth. Another easy way we could do this is, again, we can go into the search. So once we go into the search, what we need to do is search for the serial number. But in this case, we won't search for the serial number in the list. We'll search for it in this pane here, which has the details, because we need to break down the communication. So in our case, we would select the packet details. Then in Wireshark, uh, the way the serial number is referenced is using this string. So again, these strings and these filters are on the Wireshark page. If you just search for them on your browser, they will give you what the specific fields that are to be used for dissecting these packets. So we go there and find, then come to this pen here. Okay, let's go back to another file so that once we say find, it will take us directly to where the serial number is. So as you can see, we have our serial number here. So this would have been our flag. And of course, again, ensure you submit it in the correct format specified by the challenge. Again, we can also use Brim. So let me also open up Brim and open the packet too. So on Brim 2, there is also an alternative way you can use the tool, probably easier. I find sometimes Brim makes it a lot easier to quickly view things. So once we have the packet open, we'll click on Activity Overview on the left pane, and you'll see it has broken down the various types of communication we have. So in our case, we were asked about the X509 certificates. So if you want to go to these specific logs, we right click on it, then we say pivot to logs, and it will just show us the specific certificates, the specific communication with these certificates. And immediately we'll be able to view our certificate serial number here, or you can just right click on it and view the details, which should open up a pane for us that shows us the certificate number. So again, this may be an alternative to people who may want an alternative to Wireshark. So that's the solution for that challenge. So we can go back to the next challenge. We'll skip wireless 1 and wireless 2 for now, so that we solve those as our last option. So the next one was the resolver. And the question was, what is the reverse DNS record of the DNS server located outside Kenya? And you've been given the flag format. So again, I have this open in Wireshark. So let me switch to that. So in this case, the filter we'll apply is DNS. We want to view DNS records as per the question. The question was, what was the reverse DNS record of the DNS server that was situated outside Kenya? So the first thing you do is, let's clear this. We had used this search in the previous one. So we just search for DNS. That's the filter we'll use. And it will only specify the DNS traffic. So from this, we can actually see that we have 2 DNS records that have been resolved. So reverse DNS means that there's an IP that has been resolved back to its DNS, to its actual domain name. So a domain name is what we are usually used to. It's the name that makes it easier for a human or for someone that is interacting, let's say, with a browser, to be able to remember the names of a site. So let's say www.google.com is a domain name that refers to an IP. So rather than having to remember all the IPs in the world, so if we didn't have domain name servers, we would have to remember every IP. If you wanted to go to Twitter, you'd have to remember the IP for Twitter, but it's easier to have names that we can remember. So that's just what DNS is. So a reverse DNS record means that you've come from the IP and you want to know what name usually refers to that IP. In our case, we can already see we have 2 of them here. So we have dns5.wananchi.com and acr.wananchi.com. A site I usually use for reverse DNS records or to just get information about DNS records is called dnslytics.com. So let me switch to a browser and we can go to the site. So this is the site, dnslytics.com. So what this site allows you to do is give it a host name, an IP, and it will give you details about that host name or that IP. So we'll specify the 2 ones we saw there. So I'll start with the one we saw, dns5.wananchi.com. So what we want to figure out is where this is hosted and if it's hosted in Kenya. In this case, it's under the Wananchi group and the country is KE. It's hosted in KE. So this is definitely hosted in Kenya. The other one was ACR. Another thing I should tell you about DNS records and IPs is they can change. So uh, like when we were hosting the challenge, these records specified different countries. So if you solve the challenge when we were running this specific challenge during its specified week, you'd have found probably different results from what we will find. So then DNS5 would have pointed to Kenya, but ACR would have pointed to, I think at that point it was pointing to Uganda as where it was. But later, after a while, I think it changed to Kenya. So the specific one at that point was Uganda, Wananchi Cable Uganda, but it has since reverted back to Kenya. So if you run this challenge now, you would probably find that it points to Kenya now. I think we should be able to see that here. So the correct answer was the ACR. So don't worry if right now you try to do that and you see it doesn't point to Uganda. So that was the solution for this. And there are other tools you can use to do reverse DNS lookups. I'll explain two of them. There's one called NS lookup and there's one called dig. They are command line tools. Again, on the browser, there are various other sites you can use. There's one called Whois. There's a site, let me see if you can go to Whois. So if you just search for Whois, it will take you to the site. So again, you can feed this an IP or a host name or a domain, and it should give you details about your host name or your IP. So again, can give you the DNS records and so on and so forth. So it will translate your host name back to an IP. It will tell you details about it, a contact email, and so on and so forth. So next, let's go on to the next challenge. So the next challenge was called attribution. So the attribution challenge asks an IP from the city of Cheyenne, I hope that's the pronunciation, was detected communicating on the network. What is its IP? So there are various ways you can do this. Again, you can go to the two sites I've talked about. You can go to DNSlytics. First, filter out the IPs you can see in the pickup and figure out which one points to a different to this city. That would probably be tiresome and a lot of work to manually go through all the IPs that are in the pickup. So you can script it. There are command line tools that you can use to query an IP. There's a command line tool called Whois again on Linux. So Whois, if you give it an IP address, it will give you details about that IP address. I think I'll show you a bit of that. But in my case, I'll go back to Brim. Again, I prefer doing a lot of things in Brim because it simplifies a lot of these things without having to worry about having to script a lot of these things, automate them, and so on and so forth. So the first thing we do is we go back to Brim. Let me share the Brim screen. I had already opened up this. So let's go back to what we have before you apply any filters. So this is what we have at the start. Then again, as before, we can go to the activity overview. Then we want to see all the IPs that were communicating on this network, and specifically if we can identify which one was from that city of Cheyenne. So to view all the IPs and the connections, we go to the connection breakdown here. Right click on it and pivot to logs. The connection files have details of all communication that happened. So if you open that, it should give us all the communication that happened between all the IPs, from the origin host to the destination host, and the origin port to the destination port to the protocol. As you can see, Brim does a really good job of dissecting your traffic and breaking it down for you. So one thing that it also does is it adds geolocation data to the breakdown. So if I scroll to the right, you should see some geolocation information. And as you can see, gives you some country codes. So it will tell you like this, there was communication from an IP in the US, this one from Kenya, and we can immediately see the one we were asked in the challenge, the city of Cheyenne. So all we need to do is figure out what IP this is, and we have this IP here. So it's 23.103 dot, let me copy it, 23.103.189.125. So that was a very easy way of identifying this, rather than having go through all the IPs and figuring out which one is linked to this city, or having to script it and figuring out which one returns the correct city. I had talked about the command line tool called whois that also breaks down details about an IP. So let me show you how whois operates. So if I take this IP and open it up in a terminal, so there is a command line tool called whois. If you just give it an IP, it will give you all the details it can find about that IP. So in our case, we can see that it belongs to Microsoft. We can see the state, the country. So if you wanted to script a tool that breaks down details about an IP, let's say you want to see all the IPs that are from the US, you could script this and figure out details. So what we just did saved us a lot of scripting, because we would have to figure out how to extract various details from various tools. So this is one of them that breaks down a lot of the information. So hopefully, for if you want to go further or you want to test your scripting tools, you can try and filter out IPs from the pickup and run them through a scripting tool. So let's go back to our challenges. So we go to the fingerprint one. JA3 is a method for creating SSL TLS client fingerprints. We can fingerprint one client on the network using its JA3 hash. What is the JA3 hash? So I am sure a lot of people haven't heard about GA3 and GA3S hashes. So it was a way to uniquely identify clients and servers. As you know, with encrypted communication, it has become harder and harder to fingerprint network traffic because the traffic is encrypted. So what some researchers did is they used some components of the specifics of a server or a client to try and break down that traffic. So even without knowing what is in the encrypted traffic, they could try and guess, let's say, this client is a Firefox web browser communicating. This client is Spotify communicating with it's the Spotify client on your phone or on your computer. So how it does that is it looks at various parameters. It can check on uh, what types of certificates is the server using, uh, what type of specific ciphers or encryption protocols are being used by that server. Then it creates a specific fingerprint for that server. So with these hashes, you can probably identify a lot of unique communication on your network. You can even identify a Metasploit session using these hashes because the Metasploit server is set up in such a way, it's set up to accept certain SSL certificates and so on and so forth. You can identify communication coming from a Kali Linux machine. So that's how these certificates help. They help us uniquely fingerprint encrypted communications. Uh, so if you want to read more on this, you can search for the JA3. There's a GitHub on this, and there's a dedicated page that usually has that breaks down how this hash is calculated and so on and so forth. So there are two ways to solve this. There's a harder method where you go and fingerprint all the clients that are doing SSL communication. Then you go and search for their JA3 hashes. There's a repository of JA3 hashes that is available on the internet. So that's one way. Again, that is tedious because we'd have to go through every client and go figure out what is its JA3 hash. An easier way would be to use Brim. Again, Brim solves a lot of this for us. On Wireshark, again, we could use Wireshark to figure out GIA3 hashes, but you would have to add some, you'd have to make some changes to Wireshark. Wireshark allows you to import, they are called dissectors, to your Wireshark client that allows it to provide more information about the traffic that isn't in the base client that you get by default. So you can try that too. Wireshark has that capability if you import some dissectors. But for now, we'll use Brim. This Brim has this by default. So let me switch to Brim. So I think once we have Brim, let's go back to the home page. Once you open the packet, so this is the page you get when you open the packet. Again, we'll go to the activity overview. So as I mentioned, JA3 hashes are supposed to identify encrypted communication. And so we'll go to the SSL, which specified our encrypted traffic. So we'll pivot to these logs here. So again, we have one specific one. So on Wireshark, we'd have had to go through a lot uh, packets to have this breakdown uh, of the packet in such a way that it's provided to you. But Brim, with the help of Zik in the background, does this for you. So if we open this up and go to open details, we will see it actually has calculated the JA3 hash for us. So it saves us having to do a lot of work. So as I had mentioned, how this JA3 hash is calculated, it's based on parameters of that server. So as you can see, like the cipher, different clients will advertise different ciphers. They will advertise different uh, TLS versions and various details. So these are usually used to fingerprint the client. So if you ever see this JA3 hash, you'd very confidently be able to identify what type of traffic it was. So that was the flag. Again, to solve the challenge, you'd have had to submit this in the correct format. That's the word aspire, and then the curly brackets with this between the curly brackets. So I think the next two challenges are the wireless ones. I think we've covered all the rest. So the two remaining are wireless 1 and wireless 2. So we'll start with wireless 1. Someone is attacking the sub-zero wireless network. What is their MAC address? So we have a pickup again here. So we'll open it up in Wireshark. So let me open it up, then I'll share my screen. So it's opening up the packet. So once you open up the packet, this is what you see. As you can see, uh, the protocol is 802.11. That means in our case, it's not the normal regular LAN network traffic we are used to. It's specifically wireless traffic. And the good thing with Wireshark, it actually has an inbuilt wireless analyzer, wireless traffic analyzer. So if you go to wireless, you can see there's WLAN traffic here. So we can click on that and it will break down the wireless traffic for us. So let's go to what it opens up. So this is what it brings up once we go to that wireless WLAN traffic. And we can see it tells that as what the SSID was. That means the SSID is the Wi-Fi name. So that's what you usually see. The base station, as you can see here, specifies the router or the access point. So that tells us that this is the base station. And you can see from the percentage of traffic that you could easily have told this from having almost 99.5% of the traffic going to it. Then there is a client here that is doing 81.9% of traffic communication. So in our case, this is most likely going to be the client performing the attack because it's the one with the highest amount of traffic. But still, it could be a legitimate traffic. Could be a client with uh, a lot of communication between it. So it could be a good guess, but not a definitive way to say it is. So the good thing, as I told you, that Wireshark usually has filters that help you analyze traffic. So I'll take you to the browser and show you some on the Wireshark page. So if you go to this page here, wifiprofessionals.com, or just search for wireless traffic display filters for Wireshark, you should be able to view this page here, and it will break down the different types of filters you can use. So in our case, if a client is attacking a wireless network, most likely it's going to be de-authenticating other people on the network. By de-authenticating, it's kicking them out of the network. It's telling the wireless router or the access point to uh, kick out a device that is connected to the network. So in our case, we can even see that we have a breakdown of the filter we can use in Wireshark. So if I copy this and then go back to Wireshark, let me see. Yes. Okay, here it is. So if we go back to Wireshark and apply that display filter, it's a pretty big pickup, so let it process it. So this should show us the de-authentications that are happening on this network. So we can see there are a lot of de-authentications. And again, the question we were asked, and we can see there is one de-authentication and there are progressive de-authentications here. So the question was what client was attacking, was performing a de-authentication attack. So if we just select one of them and go check for what, we go to the packet details, we can view what the transmitter was, and we will find our MAC address of the client that was actually sending these de-authentication requests. So this MAC address then will be our answer. So that should solve that question. So if you want to view different types of traffic on Wireshark, you can use that page I've referenced there, where you can apply different filters to view different types of traffic. You can view types of traffic like authentication. So you can view specific traffic related to authentication. A handshake. A handshake is when a device connects to a router or a wireless network, there's an exchange of the authentication information. It's usually performed as part of a handshake. A handshake in wireless communication is an exchange of information between the device and the router so that it confirms that the device is authorized to access that network. So it's a way to prevent the password being shared in clear text. And that brings us to our final challenge, which was called Wireless 2. So let's go to the challenge and what it asked us to do. So Wireless 2 asked, what is the password to the Sub-Zero wireless network? Flag format is Aspire password. First thing is we already have this open in Wireshark. So if we go back to it on Wireshark, to be able to view authentication information, we need to confirm that a handshake was captured in this pickup. As I said, a handshake is the process where authentication information is exchanged between the router and the client or the device. So how we usually check for this is we apply a filter called EAPOL. It's a filter that will specify the handshake communication. So if we apply that filter, it should filter out any handshake information that we have in that pickup. So let the processing finalize. And as you can see, we have handshakes being completed. So a complete handshake has to have 4 messages. So these are messages exchanged between the client and the router to confirm the authentication. So as you can see, we can confirm that handshakes did occur. And as you can see here, it's actually authentication traffic. So you have 4 messages here. Uh, there are various breakdowns on how this happens. So let me open a browser page that you can also view if you want to learn more on how this handshake actually takes place. So there is this page here. It's under Meraki documentation.meraki.com, where they have a pretty comprehensive explanation of how wireless communication works, how the captures work, how the authentication takes place, and so on and so forth. So I would suggest go study on how the complete handshake works, especially this key exchange. It's usually a four-way handshake that confirms the authentication. So once you capture this, you are able to crack a password if you have a proper word list. A word list is a list that has a list of passwords that you want to guess. So in the world of wireless cracking, there is usually a tool called AirCrack NG. So what AirCrack NG does is you give it a captcha that has a handshake. So first, as we said, you have to ensure that the captcha has a handshake. Then you also specify a word list. A word list now will have a list of passwords that you want it to go through and try and see if one of them can be cracked from that list. So let me switch to my terminal and show you how AirCrack NG works. So the command is as follows. So it isn't by default installed on Linux, but if you're using a system like Kali Linux, you should have it there by default, but you can still install it on other operating systems. In my case, I'm using Ubuntu, but you can also install it on Ubuntu. So how this works is you specify the pickup that has the handshake. In this case, it's the pickup that was provided to us. Then you specify a word list using this parameter -w and give it a word list that has a lot of passwords that it can use to guess. So the roq.txt is a famous word list. It was compiled after some researchers did research on what are the most common passwords that are used. It was also based on actual passwords that had been leaked during, let's say, data breaches. So it has a comprehensive list of a lot of the most commonly used passwords and passwords that have been leaked. So let me actually first show you. So as you can see, it has a lot of passwords. So what the AirCrack tool will do is try to figure out is one of the passwords here being used in the was one of the passwords here used in the handshake. So when we actually run the tour, uh, it will go through all the passwords and figure out if it will find a key. In our case, it found it pretty fast since it was a very easy password. It was 1234567 8, and this was our key. So the flag would have been Aspire, the curly brackets, and this key here. So that should have been the answer to our final challenge. And with that, I hope for those who were able to solve the challenges, either confirmed their process, were able to learn new things. For those who weren't able to, or those who are still learning, I hope you're able to pick up a few things here and there. And hopefully you can use these challenges to even practice more and participate in more CTFs offered by both us and other organizations. So with that, I think we have a few people on Zoom. So if anyone on Zoom has any question, I'll now start allowing people to unmute themselves so that you can ask any questions that you have. So let me go back to Zoom in a bit. So you can ask a question on any of the challenges that we've done. So
Hi,
if you
CK.
prefer, you can use either the chat or you can use the mic.
Hi, CK.
Hello.
This is not a question, but it is an appreciation from the guys from YouTube. Shout out to Kevin Oyugi. He says thank you
Okay.
for the walkthrough.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Uh, and I am glad that it is helpful. So anyone with a question, use the chat. If you want to ask further information offline, you can always contact us using our other channels, using our email, using our social media platforms, our messaging platforms, and so on and so forth. So we'll take the next 2 minutes. If we have no questions over the next 2 minutes, then we will end our session and prepare for our next remote walkthrough. Hopefully that should happen next Wednesday. So I think there's a question here. What wireless adapters, dongles would you recommend for live wireless cracking using AirCrack NG? So there's a very famous one called the Alpha card. So let me show you the And if you want a comprehensive list, the AirCrack NG site actually has a list of all the cards that you would use. Actually, we should do that. It usually has, AirCrack NG has a list of compatible wireless cards that gives you an easy way to, how would I say it, figure out what card to use before you buy one and realize that it isn't compatible. So they have a compatibility list. So let me see if I can find it here. So if you go to their site, they will break down the wireless cards that are actually supported. As you can see, it's a pretty comprehensive list, but as I said, one of the most popular ones is the Alpha card. So they'll have various breakdowns, they'll have different types of cards, but to make it easier for you, just search for the Alpha wireless card. I don't know whether it's available locally in Kenya. A lot of times you probably may need to have it shipped to Kenya if you are in Kenya, but there are alternatives. A good alternative is the TP link, W722N. This one should be readily available even locally. So it's a smaller form factor, it's cheaper. So it's one I have used very successfully. So again, if you can't access the alpha ones, you can try this one. Any other question? Yeah, I've seen some comment here. I think it was based on the Cheyenne city. The question that asked from which city the IP is. And there was a comment here that on Whois it says Redmond, but on Brim we saw it said Cheyenne from the geolocation data. So the explanation from this is on Whois, what they referenced wasn't actually where the IP was located. The Whois data, the information that was given was the city in which the owner of the IP is based. The owner of the IP, as we saw, was Microsoft, and Microsoft is based in Redmond. So the headquarters of Microsoft is in Redmond, but the actual location of the IP, if you go by the geolocation data, is in Cheyenne. So what Whois was giving you was the location of Microsoft, who is the owner. Whois data actually gives you details about the ownership of the IP. So I think there may be that confusion there. Uh, so there are questions about a password list. So there are a lot of password lists that are available and they get updated every day. So you may find them on torrents, you may find them on there was a popular site called OpenWall that used to have a lot of word lists. If you need links to this, you can contact us after this, social media and everywhere, and we'll give you a list of them, both the newer ones and the older ones, because there are a lot of them and they keep getting updated. Some are in the tens of GBs. So also depends if do you have the processing power to be able to go through a very huge file in the tens of GBs? Because again, the bigger the word list, the longer it will take to go through that whole word list. Sometimes it may be easier to have a smaller uh, more inclusive word list than a larger word list that takes too long to go through. Maybe your password is in a smaller word list. So it's usually advisable to first try the smaller word lists. Then if that doesn't work, then you go to the larger ones. But we can share larger ones. I think I have seen very large ones, especially of late. Any other question? All right. Thank you, everyone. Uh, and see you next time for our next walkthrough. The details will be communicated over social media. So uh, keep a lookout on our channels and we will update you on the specific details. So enjoy your evenings and see you next time.